that have been bullied in the workplace, either by coworkers or by administrators, students, or parents. So tonight we'd like you all to remember that this webinar is a safe space for all participants. The event is confidential, and we honor the bravery and courage of all of our participants who share their teacher truths. I became a member of BATS about 5 months after BATS was started. I met Marla and Mel on Twitter, actually, and things rolled from there. I've been a public education advocate for 20 years, but I always felt like I was alone on an island. And since I've joined BATS, I have a whole swarm with me wherever I go. One thing that happened to us back in October of 2014, there were multiple teacher suicides. And this was right when the race to the top got underway, and teachers were very stressed about their evaluations. And so one night I was very, very upset and angry, and sent Randy Weingarten a very nasty email asking her what in God's name was she doing about teachers that were killing themselves because our working conditions have become so unbearable. And about 20 minutes later, Randy's chief of staff called me, and we arranged a town hall phone call. And then I'm going to turn this over to my co-facilitator, Kathy Berry, and she can tell you what happened next.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to jump right in where she left off. On that initial phone call, we had probably around 30 or so teachers, and people were sharing their stories about what was happening to them. And it was very traumatic. There were lots of teachers going through some pretty serious trauma. And we realized that no one was asking us about bullying. You know, a lot of us who were being bullied didn't even recognize it as that at first. And so we began this journey on the Quality of Work Life team, and we put out a survey in 2015 and also in 2017, looking at teacher working conditions. Some of that was scrolling at the very beginning, some of the results of that 2015 survey. Thank you, Sandy, you did a great job. And it was just from that, we know that we have to improve what's happening in the classroom. Too many people from outside are telling us what our job is, what we're supposed to be doing, and how we're supposed to be doing it. And it's gotten to a point where it's more about compliance than it is about competence. And so what we would like to do is share some things with you and kind of let you see how the bullying is defined, and you know, have a conversation and find out what we can do about it. Wilma, I'm going to turn it over to you, my dear. You're still on mute, Wilma.
Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wilma DeSoto. I am one of the members of the BAT Quality of Life team, Work Life team. I'm going to share something with my screen right now. Can everyone see my screen yet? Can everyone see the screen share yet?
Not yet, Wilma.
Okay, we'll try this again. Now?
No, it's still not coming up.
Oh yeah, okay, let's see.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. I want to welcome everybody. Like I said, my name is Wilma DeSoto, and I'm on the Quality of Work Life team for the BATS. I'm an executive director, board member. Melissa's executive director. I'm one of the board members. I live in Philadelphia. About 2 months ago, I wrote this blog called Cower, and the World Cowers with You. Stand up and you stand alone. And it was published on the Badass Teachers website. And I put the link here in case people want to look at it. But in my inimitable, pessimistic way, I was covering the fact that teachers, when they're being bullied, are usually abandoned by their colleagues and not supported at all. And that they have to prepare themselves for that eventuality and not really expect help, and to cover themselves as best they can and do what they need to do to make things better for themselves. A lot of it had to do with a concept I'll call moral disengagement. And that is formidable, where people actually separate their usual moral reactions to inhumane conduct done to people. And they kind of turn off the whole mechanism of feeling bad about themselves for doing that. In other words, how people stand by and witness bad behaviors done toward other people and are still able to live with themselves. And that is something that's very, very common. It is not a random thing. It is a deliberate thing. And there's 4 different steps to doing that. First of all, the colleagues have to create a narrative telling themselves that what they're doing is really not bad or unethical or out of the ordinary. So that's one reason why they can live with themselves. Another thing is they reduce their own sense of involvement in the decisions or actions that are happening to their colleagues. They kind of distance themselves from that as if they had nothing to do with it, as if their non-support does not add anything to the person who is being targeted. And they willfully blind themselves to those consequences. When you look for your colleagues for support and they don't do it, and they feel it's fine that they didn't do it, they willfully blind themselves that this person's hurting or this person's in trouble. They deny themselves. And finally, the 4th step is dehumanizing the person who is being bullied, disengaging them from human qualities and blaming the victim for their own misery of being targeted. So it is moral justification. It is minimizing and ignoring and misconstruing the consequences. It is dehumanization or attribution of blame to the person. It is a deliberate 4-step cognitive action that people do. Another thing in the blog, I said that the professions that people are most bullied by their colleagues in are nurses, social workers, and teachers. And this is what blindsides so many of us, because those are the alleged caring professions and nurturing professions. And people don't think of themselves, if they are part of those professions, as people who are capable of being bullies. And that also plays into the whole cognitive moral disengagement process, etc. There's another factor called situational strength, where a situation or a culture is created in the workplace that puts pressure on people to conform to whoever's getting bullied and not do anything about it. But being blindsided and expecting things from the colleagues makes it even worse for the person who's being bullied, because not only are they being bullied, they're being abandoned and they're being talked about and they're being disparaged. And some of them don't even recognize the signs of bullying. So I'm going to show you now some slides I made a couple of years ago for a Twitter chat that we had called knowing the signs of workplace bullying. And I'm going to show that now, if you don't mind. Oops, nope, I'm not going to show that now. What did I do with my window? You'll pardon me. I don't know where the screen share thing is.
So Wilma, we still see your screen.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know. Okay, then I'll start the show. There you have it. I'll take any questions, or not, I'll just move on to my next colleague. Thank you for listening.
So I haven't seen any questions come up inside the chat box yet or on the survey form.
Okay, excellent. So if it's all right, then I will take it from there for a little bit. My name is Jerry Carbo, and I'm a professor at Shippensburg University and also an attorney in West Virginia, and have been studying workplace harassment and bullying for, just sort of looked at it today, and a bit shocking to myself, for about 22 years now. And today, though, I just want to sort of cover what I would call the basics and a basic understanding of bullying and workplace harassment. And hopefully, as over the next few weeks or few months, we'll be able to have an additional webinar that will cover some of the topics I'm going to talk about today in a lot more detail. But for tonight, in the limited time we have, I have just four goals that I hope to achieve. One, I hope to help you to get a better understanding of the basic definition of workplace bullying, as well as a basic understanding of what we call unlawful harassment in the United States, which is very closely related to workplace bullying. And I want to talk about how bullying and harassment are related to each other, how bullying can also be a form of harassment. And then finally, to help you gain a basic understanding of your right to be free from harassment in the workplace. Because unlike many industrialized countries, the United States does not have a basic anti-bullying law. In fact, other than a couple of state laws and a couple of local laws, there really is no protection for general workplace bullying in the workplace. But oftentimes there's an overlap between harassment and bullying, and that's sort of the main thing that I want to talk about today. The starting point is to understand what we mean when we talk about workplace bullying. And workplace bullying is about behavior and about outcomes. And what it's not about is it's not about the basis of those outcomes or the basis of those behaviors. Workplace bullying takes many forms. Workplace bullying includes workplace harassment, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. It includes incivility, abusive supervision, violence, aggression, and other forms of objectionable behaviors. Another important thing to think about in terms of workplace bullying is it takes two distinct forms. We see interpersonal type of bullying, and this is sort of the traditional bullying, the one person to one person, or the one person to a group, or group to group, or a group to one person, these sort of human interactions. But what we see becoming more and more common is actually bullying through organizational policies, or what I would define as organizational bullying. And these are things like micromanaging, abuse of performance appraisal systems, unfair job assignments, unfair job reassignments. So bullying also takes that form, and we should be able to recognize that. Over the course of years of talking to targets of workplace bullying, I've developed what I think is a good definition. I still think that we're working on fully defining the phenomena, but I define it as the unwanted abuse of any source of power that has the effect of or intent to, either or, not both, or it could be both, but it doesn't have to be, intimidate, control, or otherwise strip the target of his or her right to esteem, growth, dignity, voice, or other human rights in the workplace. So as a professor of employment law and as an attorney, I see U.S. employees make two mistakes. On one side of the mistakes, they think that they have more legal rights than what they do. And in the United States, we don't have very strong employment rights as workers. But when we talk about workplace bullying, another mistake that seems to become more and more common is that automatically, because people are becoming aware that bullying is not unlawful, they assume that any form of bullying has no protection under the law at all. And so what I want to talk about is how bullying can also be unlawful harassment. when we think about the relationship between unlawful harassment and bullying, the way to think about it is bullying is this very broad phenomena, and unlawful harassment of all forms always are a form of workplace bullying as well. So if you are being bullied and it's a form of discrimination, and I'll talk about what that means in a second, then that is also unlawful harassment, and you might have some legal protections. What we know is that about 1 in 5 incidents of workplace bullying are also a form of unlawful harassment. So it still means that 4 out of 5 incidents, not protected by the law in any way, but those 1 in 5, too oftentimes those targets give up what might be their legal rights. So when does bullying become harassment? Bullying is harassment when it is either based on or impacts an individual based upon a protected status. So when we're talking about protected statuses from a federal standpoint, the federal laws, which include Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, we're talking about protected statuses of race, color, national origin, gender, which may include sexual orientation and sexual identity. In fact, the EEOC currently takes a position that that is included. The Supreme Court will be deciding that next term. Religion, age status over 40, disability, and then under the National Labor Relations Act, union status or union activity. Your states may also have additional protected statuses. New York has, for instance, expansive protection for age. So discrimination based upon age status over 18 is unlawful in New York. So when we talk about harassment, workplace bullying, yeah, or being a form of workplace bullying, harassment is about bullying behavior that creates a discriminatory work environment. In the words of Justice Scalia, former Supreme Court Justice, not known as being a champion of employee rights, very conservative, harassment is the creation of disadvantageous terms of employment based upon any protected status. When we look further at definitions, legal definitions of harassment, it's unwanted, objectionable conduct, again, much like workplace bullying, that is based on a protected status and where such conduct is severe and or pervasive enough to create an intimidating or hostile working environment or unreasonably interfere with the workplace. So what we see is that for bullying to become harassment, it has to be status-based or impact individuals based upon a status. The mistake that I see targets of bullying make, and it's an understandable mistake, it's something that exists throughout our society, is we define harassment way too narrowly. And we do it for a number of legitimate reasons. When we see harassment talked about in the news, and even when we see it talked about in terms of movements and organizations that are trying to talk about it in a more expansive way, such as the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, we oftentimes fall back into this perception that harassment is only sexual harassment. And it has to be this sort of sexual in nature. And we see that in the way that it is covered in the media. We see it in a way that it's depicted in TV, in movies, in books. So it's natural that we fall into that. But the reality is that's just a small portion of the harassment that occurs. And it's way more pervasive than it should be in the United States, sexualized harassment. But when we look at it statistically, gender-based harassment, while that makes up about 1/4 to 1/3 of all claims, only 10% of gender-based claims are actually sexual in nature, which means that only 2 to 3% of acts of harassment are sexual in nature. So it's better to think of this, to think of harassment in different terms and to use different terminology. So think of harassment as unlawful harassment. Harassment that is based on or impacts targets based upon their race, their color, their national origin, their gender, their age status over 40, their disability, or their union activity or union membership. So when we think about this, Bullying is this really broad phenomenon. We see that in the gold. And discrimination is also this really broad phenomena. And harassment is also really common. And what we see is that harassment is always bullying, but it's also always discrimination. So what we see is when that bullying is based upon a protected status, any of those statuses, it is unlawful. And one of the ways to think about this diagram here is everything that's in blue or sort of the green haze, it didn't exactly come out green, it looks like, there is some legal protection there, or at least the potential for legal protection. Everything in gold that falls out of that, no legal protection in the United States. But I don't want targets to think that they have no protection too quickly. So don't assume that the bullying you face is not unlawful harassment. And so what I always tell targets is ask 3 questions. First of all, when you look at the bully, did the bully target people all of one protected status? In other words, did the bully target only people with disabilities? Did the bully target only women? Did the bully target only people of color? If so, that indicates that it might be unlawful harassment as well. Also think intersectionality. Sometimes what we see is bullies will target selected groups within protected statuses. For instance, only women of color, or only men with disabilities, or only older workers with disabilities. So the intersectional categorization also would indicate unlawful harassment. Second question to ask is, but for one status, would the bullying have occurred? So in other words, if it weren't for my disability, would the bully have bullied me? And if the answer is no, then that indicates that you might be the target of unlawful harassment. Third question to ask is, even if you have a bully in the workplace that bullies everybody, does their bullying differ based upon a protected status? So in other words, do they bully women more often than men? Is the bullying directed at people with disabilities more pervasive than it is directed at others? Is it more harmful to people because of their protected status, or more offensive to people because of their protected status? If you can answer yes to any of those questions, again, that may indicate that the bullying is also unlawful harassment. So the key is, if the bullying is based on or impacts one due to their protected class, it may indeed be a form of unlawful harassment. So I know that's a lot, and I know that it's a lot to think about in a short time, but again, I just want to give you the basics, and I hope that going forward, if you are a target of workplace bullying, you don't necessarily give up the possibility of having some level of legal protection too quickly. And I want to thank you for your time. And I will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Any questions that are out there. And also we'll try to make sure that we provide some resources, such as links to the EEOC that has a plethora of resources to cover workplace harassment. But now I want to turn it over to my friend and colleague, John Snedell. He's an incredible advocate for targets of workplace bullying. He was also the pivotal player in getting an anti-workplace bullying law passed for teachers and employees in K-12 in Virginia. And it's a law that, in my opinion, it's one of the strongest workplace bullying laws that we've seen passed in a state or any locality throughout the country. And so with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Yeah, John Snedell here. I'm a retired middle school band director. I had grades 6, 7, and 8 for about 30-something years, and with over 300 students in my program every year. So it was a pretty decent position I was in. As far as bullying goes, my first bully appeared to me in 1995. And I always am very careful to point out to people that I had done nothing. I never got a chance to do anything wrong. The issue was there from the minute this lady became our principal, which was kind of frustrating because I couldn't point to anything that needed to be changed. I don't think she wanted anything to change. She wanted things just the way it was. As far as status is concerned, I'm one of those people as a at the time, middle-aged, college-educated white male. And so I'm not protected in any way when it comes to the EEOC and everything that goes with federal law. So it's an uncomfortable position to find myself in. I found that whenever I spoke to my principal, that she acted as if talking to me was unpleasant. She would never look at me while we were speaking. And anytime there was an event that would come up, she would find a way to turn it around so that it can be interpreted as me being rude or unprofessional. And I ended up with many disciplinary reports in my file because of her. And I have to tell you, the details were distorted. And in some cases, they were even lies. And yet there they were in my folder. And there wasn't anything I can do about it. People's reaction to this sort of thing became kind of an interesting experience. When I would want to vent and talk to colleagues or relatives or even the representative from our teacher association, you can just tell they had a way of kind of broadcasting it to you, dog whistle style, that they're not sure that it isn't my fault in some way, that I must have done something, made a mistake, or we had a disagreement with me and the principal, and she wasn't a forgiving type, that sort of thing. And it was really impossible to keep people from having that in the back of their minds. When I was in meetings with the principal, talking about the things that took place, none of my statements were ever really made part of the record. When you look at my file, if I wrote a letter of response, it would be in there, but it wouldn't be attached to the letter of reprimand. It was really only there to satisfy me, and no one else would look at it. If I was in a parent conference, parents were allowed to speak to me in a rude, antagonistic manner. And if I dared get annoyed about that and display that annoyance, it was another opportunity to write a letter of reprimand for being rude to the public. I actually got suspended for that at one point. That lack of an outlet, an opportunity to talk about my problems and all, just being able to vent, it ended up with me in therapy at that point. And I continued seeing a therapist for about 20 years. So it didn't go away easily. Like I said, this took place back in 1995 to 97. I had that first bully for 2 years. My second bully was at the end of my career. I had her for 2 years. And the end of my career was marked by me being taken out of the school in an ambulance with an anxiety attack. And then after that, I never went back. So that was my going away party. But back in 95, the internet wasn't really a thing yet. And as time went by and I began to discover the internet, I began to find blogs and articles written by targets themselves, which was interesting. It was interesting to find out that this sort of thing happened elsewhere, but it was also kind of discouraging because there was so much of it out there. Bullying is just everywhere, and not just in the US, but in other countries as well. And there's not a lot of encouragement out there, even with a group like the Workplace Bullying Institute out on the West Coast. They seem to even believe that when you're a bully target, the best thing to do, among other things, of course, would be to get your work history together, because you're probably going to need to find another job. So there isn't a lot of encouragement out there. I did piece things together in time. the National Workplace Bullying Coalition put me in touch with Jerry Carbo. You just heard from Jerry a few minutes ago. Jerry works with the bats, and they were working on this issue in a way that I can relate to. It seemed to make sense to me that legislation could very well be the answer to what we were looking for. At first, I tried to put through the Healthy Workplace bill, which was something that was originated with the Workplace Bullying Institute. I got my state delegate to help me with this. He put it out there, and it died before anybody even read it. I mean, they just saw the name Healthy Workplace Bill, and they said, we don't even want to consider that. So the first year, that was a disappointment. But we didn't stop. Jerry had some other suggestions. He suggested that I look into what they did in California and in Tennessee and North Dakota, where they were able to take workplace bullying and attach it to sexual harassment laws. And that helped, I guess, because that way they didn't have to write a whole new set of laws. They were able to just tack it on to things that already existed. So it worked for them. That didn't work in Virginia. Our sexual harassment laws were different. So we ended up having to attach it to the state regulations that govern, or the state code, excuse me, that regulate the schools in the state. We attached it to bullying, just like a lot of school districts had, and they specified for workplace bullying. It wasn't a bad idea. It says, as you can see right there under Section B, to prohibit abusive work environments in the school division, provide appropriate discipline for people who break that rule, and prohibit retaliation. All of that was really nice stuff, but then when it was signed into law in July last summer, and the school districts had to write regulations to meet that law, I found that our regulation here in Prince William County, they took the teeth right out of the thing. They took all the things that are considered regular job of administrators. Things like letters of reprimand, suspensions, things of that nature. They are the normal work product of the administration, so they're not considered bullying. So right there, they kind of put us back where we started. So you know, it's kind of a frustrating situation to be in. What I did, and I finished it today, I put the letter in the mail. I wrote a letter to our school board chairperson, in which I told him how I felt about the way the regulation came out and how I would like to see him revisit that regulation with the Human Resources Department to see if they could come up with something that gives teachers more of a level playing field. Because right now, the way they've done it, it's still the same institutionalized bullying that we've had all along. They can still do what they've been doing. So I'm hoping to hear from my school board chair sometime soon after he's read my letter. I also took that letter and I CC'd it to my superintendent. And here's the reason why. Back 25 years ago, with my first bully, when I was about to be voted for suspension by the school board, the Teachers Association went with me to my superintendent to ask him to help us out, see if they can, see if he could help me so that I wouldn't be suspended and that I'd be saved that embarrassment and that upset. And he decided that the best thing to do would be to leave it to my bully to decide if I should be suspended or give me a break and let me work it out with my therapist, because I was on medication. I was a walking zombie most of the time at this point. So he decided that my bully should decide if I should be punished. And she, of course, said, yes, he needs to be punished. So I was suspended for a day without pay, and I managed to get through it, but it wasn't easy. Truth of the matter is, it could be that I was just a chicken and I just couldn't go through with it, but I was at the end of my rope. So the fact that I made it, maybe it's because I cared for the people who cared for me, but I'm still here talking about it. I got through it, and as you can see, the bully actually was just with me for 2 years. Then we had a great principal for 10 years, and then another bully came along, and that was after 2 years of that and a day in the hospital. My wife said, it's time you got out of this, because I had enough years for retirement. I was able to retire and get my pension. Some of my colleagues didn't. So there's that. So that's my story. And I think that the bottom line for everybody is try to do something. Don't feel that you are helpless. And just know that the people around you may not be there to help you like you would want them to, but you got to try to do something. So there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for everything you've done for all the teachers that have been bullied. Your legislation is model legislation across the country that we're all working towards protecting each other in the workplace. Mel, do you got questions?
I do. I have a couple questions that were sent in. I just want to, again, thank John for sharing his story. It's not easy to talk about when you've been through a situation that creates trauma in your life. It brings up those feelings of trauma again. But it's really, really so very important that we share these stories and we have these conversations and bring what's happening out into the light, because for so long it's only been kind of whispered behind our classroom doors as we talk to our co-workers and try to figure out if somebody's experiencing what you're feeling. But the more we talk about it, the more people will begin to realize what's happening in our profession. So our first question, somebody asked if we could talk about disabilities that are not visible. And that was during Jerry's presentation. So I don't know if he wants to start off by speaking about that, and then if anybody else in our team wants to chime in.
Yeah, so I mean, real quickly, just from a legal standpoint, of course, what I would say is that, disabilities, visible or not visible, have the same protection. And, one of my pieces of advice that I always give as an attorney, and this comes from maybe my labor side as an attorney, is you're better to make sure that the administration knows what you're doing so that they can't later deny that they knew about it. So for me, they're going to know. And people will find a weakness, and if it's a hidden disability that they want to use to target you and to bully you, they'll find that. And so to me, it's important to to make the administration aware, whether it's by asking for an accommodation or telling them that you may need an accommodation for it. That way, if something does occur, they can't use the defense, well, we had no idea, so we couldn't have done this based upon a disability. Because that is what they will do. That will be their first defense, right? It's the deny defense. So, but there's little doubt that those are covered by the ADA. There's little doubt that people are targeted because of those, and there's little doubt that the most likely outcome is that HR won't help you and the administration will deny it on the back end. So take that away from them is my legal advice.
Excellent. Excellent. Does anybody else want to speak to that issue?
Okay, this is Sandy. Just some thoughts about disability. I mean, I was born with a visible one, and I've acquired invisible ones over my lifetime. And we know from the survey that while there are very few teachers who self-identify in having a disability, a high number of them experience bullying and harassment. And so I think that for people who do not identify in having a disability, if a colleague shares with you, something about a disability and being bullied, take it seriously. And I would, if you see it, if something is going on, document it. If you have a disability and you need an accommodation, I'd say first find others with the same disability and find out what they would do. I mean, if it's arthritis or multiple sclerosis or depression, find organizations that deal with that and then connect with them. Also join Bats with Disabilities, which is a group. If you're a member of Badass Teachers Association, join us and get some help there. I filed with United States Department of Education, OCR, for retaliation, and they're pretty decent. Also, like California has Department of Fair Employment and Housing. They're really good too. And there's a lot of strengths in having a disability. It's not a source of shame. It's a source of strength. And so if your administrator is inferring in some way that your disability is a deficit, then he needs a little bit, or she needs a little bit of an education that it's also a source of strength. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. Kathy, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to discuss this a little bit because one of the things that we don't think about, we don't put ourselves first, and we do many times try to hide anything that we're going through. John shared about being on medication for anxiety and everything as he was going through what he was going through. And I think as teachers, we give and give and give and give and give. And we forget that we have to take care of ourselves. And it's just too easy to have that martyr complex of, well, I just don't have any choice. I must do this. Yeah, you do. You have choices. And one of the things I wanted to say about bully admins too, picking at disabilities. I am aware of a teacher friend who had serious migraines. And somebody brought up the thing about students harassing and being verbally abusive and everything. And the administrator, when she would be suffering from a migraine and go in during her planning and close her door and turn off the light, this child would harass her and come by and bang on all the lockers and bang on her door and yell. And the administrator did absolutely nothing. She wouldn't complain. She wouldn't say anything. And yet, because she had migraine, that is a disability. That is a physical problem that, she could manage at school, but she just needed to do that. And, he was not supportive at all and basically forced her into retirement, and she wasn't ready. And she was a very, very good teacher. And it's sad that this is happening. And, at some point we have to stand up for our friends and for our colleagues and not let this happen to people anymore. One of the things that Jamie said at the very beginning, one of the things that galvanized us to become this group was the fact that teachers were deciding to take their own lives over the things that were happening to them in school, over their jobs, because they were being taken away from the thing that they loved, the profession that they were good at. They'd gotten exemplary evaluations their whole career, and all of a sudden it was turned upside down. And we need to stand together, and we need to inform each other, and we need to help each other.
You know, and just to piggyback on what Kathy said, our survey results from 2015 and 2017 showed no improvement. A matter of fact, they showed conditionings worsening for teachers in the classroom. Over 43% of the teachers reported bullying. And in our protected groups, the numbers were way beyond that, well over 53 and 55%. So I feel like we're a profession under siege, and that we're experiencing an epidemic, and it is killing teachers' health. It is. I know that our survey also revealed over 85% of the teachers being treated for some form of a stress-related illness. So we're talking life and death and a serious issue here, where we need to be able to learn and give ourselves the tools how to support each other. Mel, do we have another question?
We do. We have kind of a story and then a question attached to it. So I'm going to read it all out. Teachers outed a staff member because they heard she was looking for a same-sex partner. The principal was asked by parents to remove their child from a teacher's classroom for religious reasons. She was perceived to be a lesbian. The admin removed the child. The same administrator put a letter in her personnel file alleging her to have, I'm very bad at reading this word, pedophilia. Thank you.
Pedophilia.
All this resulted in a huge lawsuit, which was recently settled. Board of Ed wants to move on. None of the employees who engaged in this were fired. What can a school district do to address the bullying and harassment? Not long ago, even a board member shared at a board meeting that she was bullied. I'm going to jump in here first because there's a lot going on in this legally. I can see that right now, and I'm not going to speak to that because that's not my area of expertise. But my area of expertise is organizing and getting people in your building together and sharing these stories. And this is part of why it's so important to have these conversations, because when you find the common thread behind the stories, that's something that you can organize and build a campaign against to create change in your building. And I'm just going to mention a great tool to help you guide through that is Labor Notes, Secrets of a Successful Organizer. But Jerry, I think maybe I'm going to go back to you with some of the legal implications in this.
Yeah, so don't, because it's a specific incident, I don't want to give too much what would be defined as legal advice, but legal information I can provide, and I don't know the jurisdiction or anything. But what I would say is that you can always, if you want to, as administration, deal with bullies in the workplace. You can discipline bullies in the workplace. There are numerous arbitration cases that say, yes, bullying is a workplace violation. When you get into bullying and harassment and you fire somebody for being the bully or the harasser, there is a qualified immunity for employers. So this idea that they're going to come back and sue you is just really a lame excuse. If administration wants to do something about the bullies, they can address the bullies. It is, to me anyways, lazy of them and an excuse not to. So if it is a problem and it continues in the workplace, I would continue to push it. If it is in a state where sexual orientation and identity are protected statuses, my recommendation would also be to explain that allowing it to continue is allowing a form of unlawful retaliation, and administration must address it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Jerry. One of the things that I've seen happen is I've watched teachers that actually report bullying to administrators, and yet the administrator actually enables the bullier to continue to bully. And most teachers that I've talked to that are in this is a real common predicament that I find that teachers that I've talked to about workplace bullying, this is what's going on. They don't know how to respond to that. They don't know that, how I had a phone call tonight for about 45 minutes discussing with a teacher about a situation where it was they get called into the principal's office because of something somebody said. I go, well, who's saying this? Well, I don't know. I said, you have a right to know. If you're getting called in and asked questions, you have a right to know as to where they're getting their information from. A principal can't accuse you with, without evidence or even ask you about something. And I said, this administrator is creating a hostile work environment for you. And I said, you need to use those terms. And so the goal of this team is to continue a series of Teacher Truth webinars to empower teachers to learn to stand up for themselves and teach teachers how to be supportive of those who need our support and help them to stand up for themselves. Because our profession is bleeding teachers, and we are the next generation. They need us to save the profession of teaching, or I don't know where even this country will be. Public education is a cornerstone of our democracy, and we have to save our profession so we can save the kids. It's just the way I feel about it. Do we have any other questions, Mel?
Nope, that's all the questions.
Does anybody else have comments they'd like to share? We've got a small enough group where you can open up your mics and share or discuss anything you'd like to talk about this evening.
Can I jump in? Something that I wanted to say also about being targeted by an admin. Sometimes when, especially as an older teacher, you can be targeted by being switched jobs. Now sometimes, and that's a fine line, because sometimes they really do have a necessity to move you to a different position. And you know that when that happens and you are supported in that position because they needed you there and they give you the support like they would a new teacher because it's not something you've done in a long time or maybe something you've never done, then you know that's a pretty legit thing. But if you have been, if you are an older teacher and you get moved positions and then everything you do is nitpicked and found fault with, that's a pretty good indication that you've been targeted to be pushed out. They've moved you from your support group, from your team that you've worked with for a lot of years. They have taken away any other supports professionally and otherwise to help you get your feet under you in this new position. And you need to document. You need to document because they are trying to push you out. And you need to be aware that that's what's up. Most teachers, they don't understand what happened. They don't realize until too late that that's what's going on. And you've got all these bad evaluations. You've got all of this stuff being put in your file, and it is their way of getting you out.
Sure
because
is.
you cost them too much money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cheryl?
Right now, the last round of evaluation systems were put through around the 2010-2012 era, where testing was made a huge part, 40 to 50% of teachers' evaluations, and has been used as a bullying tool. And also professionalism has been made a default that you can be basically fired at will in many states if you fail, if a supervisor deems you have failed any professionalism, including things like insubordination. At this point in time, a lot of districts and states, because of ESSA and other changes, are going back and looking at those evaluation systems. I would highly encourage everyone who has experienced bullying to be active and vocal in the reconstruction of a more equitable evaluation system for teachers across the country. Because if we don't fix it at that level, it's going to be a constant battle for the next 5 to 8 years.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So speak up, be out there.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to share? Got any more questions that came in, Mel?
Nope, that's it.
All right. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone for sharing our first teacher truths. I hope that you walk away with some knowledge that you didn't have before. And the most important thing is that educators, teachers, you're not alone. You're never alone in a battle against bullying in the workplace and all the other bullying that's coming externally from the political policymakers. We are strong when we're united, and BATS is an organization that operates to unite teachers to fight against the oppression of our profession. So join us. Thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, QWL team.
Night all. Have a good
Night,
evening.
all. Night, John.
Good night.
Night.